All right, good morning, everyone. I think we're going to get started. I want to make sure we have enough time to go through the presentation and answer any questions you might have along the way. So I'd like to welcome you to our session on hosting Fulbright students and scholars at UF, and we'll be talking about process, benefits, and responsibilities. This is our third time having this session. So we've amended this session and pulled it together over the last 2 or 3 years, knowing that more and more questions about both students and scholars have been coming up about how to bring them here and what to do to manage the administrative process and make sure that their experience is a good one here. So I'm Matt Maturko. I work in the graduate school in the Office of Graduate International Outreach, and I'll be presenting with Deborah Anderson, who's the Director of International Student Services in the International Center. So we'll divide up our presentation appropriately and answer questions along the way whenever a question comes up. So to start with a little bit of background on the Fulbright program, it was created in 1946 by William Fulbright. He was the author of the Fulbright Act, and the aim was to pursue the promotion of international goodwill through the exchange of students in the fields of education, culture, and science. So it was clear from the beginning that the program was started for both educational and cultural exchange purposes. The Fulbright program itself is housed within the Department of State in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. It has continued to be a shared endeavor by both U.S. governments, the U.S. government and foreign governments. Typically, foreign governments provide about 20% of funding for the Fulbright program, but that does vary from year to year and what contributions any one country may make to the program. Each year, about 8,000 awards are offered within 4 general categories of Fulbright awards. So there are about 1,600 U.S. students who go abroad on a Fulbright award. There are about 4,000 foreign students who come to the United States for graduate study. There are 1,200 U.S. faculty members who serve as scholars going abroad, and about 900 visiting scholars who come to the U.S. every year from international destinations. There's some other programs as well that we'd like to highlight, particularly the specialist program, which is a short-term Fulbright program for U.S. faculty who would like to go abroad, not for 4 months, 8 months, or an entire year, but potentially for 3 or 4 weeks. There's the U.S. student program, which I mentioned. There's the foreign language teaching assistantship program, which does address language training in areas of need for languages that either are underrepresented at universities around the United States, or there's a need to preserve those languages in higher education to make sure that there are scholars doing research on those. So that's available, as well as the Fulbright Days program, which is for doctoral dissertation research for U.S. students to go abroad. The particular program I'll spend most of my time talking about is the Fulbright Foreign Student Program. So we commonly refer to our Fulbright foreign students as Fulbright Fellows. They are recipients of a fellowship, and they're selected by their Fulbright Commission or the Public Affairs Branch of the U.S. Embassy for placement in the United States for graduate study. So there is a competitive process in order to select the entire class of that 4,000 that will come to the U.S. each year. Those students can apply for master's or PhD degrees. Typically, the number of awards that are available from any one country will vary based on the priorities the U.S. government has, as well as the priorities of the students' respective country. Funding provided can range from 1 to 5 years, and the funding is somewhat uniform and somewhat not, which is why we tend to cover this and also discuss further along in the process as you look at placing Fulbright students on campus. So all Fulbright awards will, or all Fulbright fellows will receive a stipend, health insurance, funding for travel to the United States, and typically some other allowances, which may be a small book allowance or a settling-in allowance, essentially to defray some costs early on in the first term. In other cases, There's other funding included, but that's the general Fulbright package that's provided. The stipend is determined by cost of living estimate unless otherwise noted. So typically, that amount is $1,340 per month. But again, that's unless otherwise noted. So that's for a 9-month award, which there are a small number of 9-month awards, that's about $12,000. For a 12-month award, that's about $16,000. So funding, that funding is also sometimes a part of a larger award. And I will talk a little bit about that later. So funding may include tuition from Fulbright, or it may not. In many cases, we've seen partial funding for tuition, where the Fulbright Commission will ask for funds from the university to cost share, potentially pay for part of tuition, and then Fulbright will pay part of tuition as well. And that, as I said, that funding award may vary from country to country. So some countries will provide all of their PhD students for 5 years of funding. Some countries will provide PhD students with 2 years of funding. Many of our master's students are provided relatively uniform 2 years of funding for programs, so they are typically funded closer to degree completion than our PhD students, but again, that can vary from country to country. So to cover briefly the benefits of admitting Fulbright students, I think the most obvious benefit is that they can assist in internationalizing your program. So, so far this year, we've had applicants from 28 different countries that are applying for admission in fall 2017. The number typically varies between 25 and 45 countries every year. So there are a range of applicants from around the world, and in many cases, the Fulbright program allows students from countries that don't have a lot of resources otherwise to pursue graduate study in the United States. So we do see applicants coming from a number of locations where there isn't a lot of access to higher education otherwise. And again, cultural exchange is a required component of the award. So that means that Fulbright participants do get involved in cultural activities on campus and can participate in departmental activities as well, if that's a part of your curriculum, whether, like I say, undergrad or graduate programming for your students. They also bring research and professional experience from their home countries. Some programs explicitly state that their applicants are part of the faculty development program. So in those cases, they are typically established faculty. I've seen some cases serving as faculty for 5 to 10 years back home in an institution. And the intention is for those students to pursue a PhD here in the United States and then return home to be faculty members at those institutions. So they already have a good sense of what's expected in academia. They'd like to improve their skills and bring some valuable experience back home. And there's a potential connection for you to work with experienced faculty at an international location, but also develop a relationship with that institution. I also want to mention that we do have an established network of Fulbright students on campus. We typically have had, I guess over the last 3 years, somewhere between 60 and 80 active Fulbright students on campus. And so there are events that are held throughout the year in order to pull Fulbrighters together, and that includes Fulbright Fellows and U.S. scholars and other visiting scholars in a network that Deborah and I participate in. So there's both the Fulbright Lecture Committee, which you may have seen advertising for this workshop through that committee that develops events for Fulbright students and scholars. There's also the North Florida chapter of the Fulbright Association. So that organization is funded also by the Department of State to provide opportunities for social activities and cultural exchange for Fulbright students. So there are a number of ways in which Fulbrighters also get together on campus and can again network, both with your program and with the rest of campus. The other benefit certainly is that funding does defray, although it doesn't completely pay for a student's costs for a graduate degree. So the funding is helpful, but there are certainly issues or questions to come up with as to how to make the most competitive funding package work for you as well as the student. Are there any questions at this point? No? Okay. So there are 3 placement agencies that work with Fulbright Fellows. AIM East organizes applications for the Middle East and North Africa. IIE, the Institute of International Education, provides the most applicants to the University of Florida. I don't have a number breakdown, but I would say probably somewhere around 55 to 60% of our applicants are placed through IIE. And LASPO, which is based out of Harvard University, places most but not all applicants from Latin America. So there is some overlap between the responsibilities or the geographic responsibilities of each of these organizations. So if you do have any questions about who the proper placement official is or who you might want to work with, if you want to talk about Fulbright Fellows at all, certainly let me know. So the placement agencies are involved throughout a student's application lifecycle. They assist applicants after they've been selected for a Fulbright award, and they will prepare applications and submit applications on their behalf for typically between 2 to 4 institutions. So if applications are submitted to the University of Florida, the odds are that we are pretty high on their list, as it is at the moment. The agencies do obtain a release for managing the application process and for communicating with institutions. And those placement officials do serve as a conduit between universities and their Fulbright Fellows. So those placement officials do work with a budget that they manage for both students within a respective country. They may work with Fulbright commissions as well to make sure that the priorities of the Fulbright Commission as established are being understood and managed throughout the application process. So there's often a lot of communication between programs, myself, placement officer, just to make sure that a student's application and their placement at an institution is appropriate, particularly for coming to UF. So agencies are looking for, again, a match between countries' interests, cost sharing, since funding offers do not provide all the funding for graduate education. In some cases, they're looking for something that would look like an assistantship to be put together with the combination of funding that's available, and for a student advisor or department fit. So in some cases, there needs to be a clear fit between a student and advisor, and I've heard that from many programs where if a student doesn't fit with the prospective PhD mentor, then they really wouldn't be a good fit for the program and they won't consider them, which certainly seems wise to make sure that the student is a fit from the beginning. In other cases, particularly for master's students, there may not need to be a direct fit between an advisor and a student, and so those students, there may be a match in subject matter or research area where they'll fit with UF. There are, to explain who's involved in the process, the administrative process, there are 4 of us that are involved in the student and scholar process. I thought it would be helpful to talk about the scholar process as well, so I included Scott here. The 3 of us that work on the student process are Denise Stoughton, who's here in the Office of Admissions, myself, and Deborah. Denise and I work together essentially in parallel at the same time. Denise works on handling the admissions materials that the Fulbright placement officers submit, and submitting them for credential processing and uploading those materials to a student's online application and e-referral. And at the same time, I work with Denise to make sure we have the relevant materials if there are any missing, if there's anything we need to get. But also coordinate with our graduate programs to talk about funding issues, placement issues, and how to make a Fulbright award work best, and a Fulbright Fellow work well in your program, knowing what their constraints might be, and what their research interests might be, and what your program's research expertise might be. And Deborah works on the process once they've decided to come. So she will work with Fulbright Fellows on check-in process, tracking students' visa status along the way, and then also making sure that we're retaining our Fulbright Fellows while they're here, particularly if they're here for a PhD. Scott Davis in the International Center does something similar on the scholar side, though the process isn't nearly as involved. So he's involved in placement of scholars who apply to visit UF for research, as well as monitoring them while they're here during the 3 to 12 months they might be. So for the, I talked about the main administrative players, but there are also, just to give you an idea of who else is involved in placing Fulbright Fellows in the United States. There are 8 stakeholders that I've listed here that you can sort of go around the circle to see who's involved where in the process. The Fulbright Commission starts the process by selecting Fulbright Fellows. Placement agencies are involved in submitting actual applications. The Office of Admissions and myself and the graduate school, we work with trying to coordinate the admissions process along the way and work with all of you in graduate programs and colleges when appropriate to help you make the best decisions you can about the credentials of our Fulbright applicants. The International Center is involved with, again, supporting our Fulbright Fellows once they get here and decide to come to UF. And then the Fulbright Association and Fulbright Lecture Committee do provide additional support in terms of retaining and providing opportunities for cultural exchange. So in some cases, any one of these stakeholders may be involved in the recruitment process or retention process, and there may be opportunities for all of us to participate in different components of the process. So I wanted to mention that this group of stakeholders does participate because there may be a critical component that any one of these stakeholders could contribute while you're trying to recruit a Fulbright Fellow. So in some cases, we've had Fulbright Fellows who've been interested, they've applied to UF, they've been interested in what network exists on campus, and they volunteered their information to connect with current Fulbrighters on campus in order to see what does the Fulbright network look like here, and how well are Fulbright students supported. So that's been, I think, a help for them to understand what kind of network exists here, what kind of support will they get. So there may be ways in which our recruitment and retention efforts can work hand in hand. So I wanted to also provide a short summary of some tips to think about for recruiting Fulbright students. Mostly I've talked about how to handle the admissions process, how to deal with applications as they come in. And typically Fulbright applicants apply to the institutions they think are a good fit based on their advice that they've received and what they're looking to do. But there are also ways in which you can proactively try to find Fulbright applicants for your graduate programs. So in the short term, certainly contact us in the graduate school or in the International Center to find out if there are potential applicants out there. I do get contacted by our placement officers who are looking to place students in the United States. I've had them contact me as late as June for the fall term, and we've in fact made that work in a number of cases. So there are ways in which we might be able to find students who are fit for study at UF, but without being able to put everything together and connect people through the admissions process, that wouldn't have happened. So if you are interested, certainly let us know and see. We might be able to talk with placement officers as well about what your priorities might be and what students you might be looking for. We also have some information, particularly for Fulbright scholars, but in some cases for Fulbright students, in the UFIC's global newsletter, where there are advertisements for short-term Fulbright awards or changes to the Fulbright program. And longer term, you may want to look at connecting with any international partner institutions you might have, or institutions of existing Fulbright Fellows that might serve as a potential location for developing a pipeline. So we do see students apply from countries who then have friends who apply again in future years to the same program. So there is a possibility of working with both institutions or with countries where you might be able to regularly attract a couple of Fulbright applicants per year to your program. And I would also encourage you, lastly, to consider contacting Fulbright commissions or U.S. embassies, and I'd be happy to coordinate that process to help you map out what that might look like. But there are some commissions that are really proactive about placing students, and sometimes have really unique awards that students could qualify for. And so we can help connect you through that process. Any questions? Comments? No? Okay. So since there are so many stakeholders involved, I wanted to provide a short summary of the admissions process for Fulbright Fellows at UF and who's involved in the process. So for applications that are submitted, they're submitted by a student's or a fellow's placement agency, and their materials are submitted to a listserv email address. That email address is fulbright@admissions.ufl.edu. So Denise and I both monitor that email address for our respective portions of the placement process. So if you have any questions about materials that are missing, that's the first place I'll check. And either Denise or I should have some record of, if not an application, then a request for admission. Denise often also initiates a credential review in cases where it's appropriate. So we can expedite the review of credentials for Fulbright Fellows, but we need to know that as early as possible when you're considering a Fulbright Fellow for admission. So that's certainly something that is an option that we can work with throughout applications for the fall term. So I will typically send out an email to at least make sure that the materials that we've received have been shared properly with our graduate programs. In some cases, those are attached to files in e-referral, and sometimes they're not. So I try to make sure at least everyone has a copy of those materials. So at the program level, you'll certainly look at files and determine whether or not a student is a fit for the program. And if so, that's when we begin discussing a cost-sharing negotiation. That typically occurs between our programs, potentially with your college, myself, and the placement agency. So there's typically a long loop of negotiation to figure out what the best funding offer would look like. And then you would, should we come to a good resolution, you would provide an offer of admission. So throughout the admissions process, I mentioned that credential review can be expedited, but there may be additional materials that we need to obtain. So I'd certainly encourage you to submit any applicant that you're considering for admission for review as soon as possible, and then we can negotiate on additional materials if we need to find them. You should also verify if language instruction is necessary. Many of our Fulbright awards do include between 3 and 6 months of funding for English language training, whether it's at UF or at another institution in the United States. So if language training is the only concern you have about an applicant, then there may be options to facilitate their training and preparation right before they arrive for the fall term. And so if that may make or break the decision to admit a Fulbright Fellow, certainly let me know, and we can explore the options in the materials that we've provided, or we might even talk with the placement officer to see what's available. And if that's not the case, so if, say, a language score is a little bit low, and you do still have concerns about the score, but you want to find out more, you might consider an offer of conditional admission. So in this case, you might look at, say, a TOEFL score of 76. You might say this applicant looks great, but they're below 80, and so we would look for evidence that you may be able to obtain to show that they're clearly qualified despite their low score. It could be that if they had a historically low test scores that they've provided in the past. It could be that you have information from their letter writers, or you've had extensive contact with an applicant before, you've had Skype interviews. There's any number of sources for supplementary information for us to consider conditional admission. So I'm certainly open to conversations about that and can help you navigate through that process as well. I'd also like to spend a little bit of time talking about the cost-sharing options, knowing that they are often the most challenging part of placing a Fulbright Fellow at UF, but probably at most U.S. institutions. So the tuition portion is often the hardest component to make work for a Fulbright Fellow, knowing that most students do not receive tuition funding at all. So they would be charged the non-resident rate, which is typically about $30,000 per year. So we do have two options for Fulbright Fellows to defray some of that cost. For Fulbright Fellows from Latin America and the Caribbean, there's a Florida state statute that allows them to be considered residents for tuition purposes. So that is the LAC Scholarship Program, which you can find. I didn't include it here, but there is a website listed on the International Center's website with a form to walk through the process. There's a manual process whereby you can submit that the student would be considered resident for tuition purposes. And they qualify by virtue of receiving a federal fellowship or a fellowship from federal funds. And since the Fulbright Fellowship is from the Department of State, they would qualify as a resident for tuition purposes as long as they have that funding. The other option, which was created to work in parallel with the LAC scholarship, is for students outside of Latin America and the Caribbean. So those I handled through the graduate school, and so we provide them on a rolling basis based on whatever additional support you can show that you're able to provide for Fulbright Fellows. So they will also be in effect for the entire Fulbright Award. So for students who receive funding for 4 years, that non-resident waiver would be in effect for 4 years. But we only have a set number of those. So I think I've talked with a few programs for fall 2017, but we have about 14, I think it's 14 for fall 2017. So that number, we may reach that number, we may not. So if you are interested, let me know. I try not to promise funding that I don't have. So if you are interested, I can essentially earmark those to make sure that if your student ultimately decides to enroll, that there would be funding available. So you can communicate that in writing, and we can provide the best cost-sharing offer available from UF. So in addition to those two options for cost-sharing the non-resident portion of tuition, I do often work with programs on the options for providing the resident portion of tuition. In some cases, colleges can provide that funding as well. And so there is often a customized letter or offer of admission that's put together so that both students, placement officers, and in some cases the Fulbright Commission can track where every portion of the funding will come from. So I'm happy to work with any of you that have questions on both how to put those together or what funding package may work as the most competitive offer. So all of that funding, ideally we will put in writing so that it can then be shared with placement officers for their financial award information form. So that information is critical for the transition process because Fulbright Fellows are unique in that we actually don't start the visa request process here at UF. It's actually done via their placement agencies. So that wrinkle is just one of the things to think about in terms of managing them as students on campus as well once they get here. But I will certainly leave Deborah to talk about the details of that, since that's the process where my students come here and stay at UF. So I think I will turn things over to Deborah.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to have to walk. This is a very comfy room. So I have been the liaison with the 3 placement agencies for now going on 17 years. And we work very closely together. As you know, those of you, how many of you have Fulbright in your program now? You do currently? We try to be as connected with you and the student as possible. We have to report things to the sponsoring agency rather than directly to the federal government. So it's important for us to stay in tune with what's going on with the students. We get involved after the student has been offered admission. Many times the students will contact me directly, and otherwise then I'm in connection with their sponsoring agency. These students will come on a J visa. Therefore, they'll have a DS 2019, and they will have to have all of their process completed. And honestly, I mean, we're up in the air as to how the current executive orders are going to affect students. We're kind of in a standstill, but we don't know whether or not it will impact the students getting a visa, depending especially on the country where they're from. So that's another thing Matt was talking about. If you're considering a Fulbright student, you also want to keep that in mind. The sooner you get your applicants to the admissions and through that process, the better it will be. Fulbright is very good about assisting the students in applying for their visas, and actually having that Fulbright behind their name is also a benefit. We don't see as many problems with those kids if they have to renew a visa as we do with some of our other students. As Matt said, the sponsoring agency is really the one that is responsible for processing their documents and reporting to the federal government. However, if I know something's going on with the student, which normally they will come and see me. I have a very close connection with the Fulbright students, the international kids that come here, and we start working on that. And I will send them to the particular resources that they need to talk to, and especially their sponsoring agency. One of the things you may hear off and on is some of the advisors from those sponsoring agencies are not always very responsive in a timely manner. So what I do with the Fulbright students is have them include me on any correspondence that they're having with their advisor at IIE or Les Powell or Amides. And usually it goes a little bit quicker. They can enter the U.S. like any other international student only 30 days before the program starts, unless there's a special exception for language, or they also have a pre-immersion program where they will go to different locations in the U.S. and they will inform them about what it's like to be a student in the United States, what they can expect, those kinds of things. So their documents may show time prior to what you would expect a 30-day window to be. The international students, by federal law, this is not an international center requirement, it is federal law that we have to check in each and every student when they come into the U.S. And we do that in a one-on-one basis, even when we have 1,600 new kids coming in the fall. So I am the liaison with the sponsors, and all Fulbright students will check in with me. They get a form which is called Terms of Appointment. And in their Terms of Appointment, my name will appear as the international student advisor. And that's because I'm responsible for the immigration side of things. There will also be on those Terms of Appointment, especially if they're PhDs, whoever their advisor is going to be in the particular program where they're studying. So if you've accepted a student that's a Fulbright student, it would be great for us to be notified. It's not required for the International Center to be notified. We'll be notified eventually by the sponsor. And last year, Matt's list was more actively accurate than the ones that I got from the sponsor. So, but we do appreciate notification, and the students reach out to me. They reach out to me about information that they might need when traveling to the U.S. and particularly to Gainesville. So it's important that we have this accessibility for them, because they're invited guests to this country by our own government and our university. We do have a great program, and trust me, I love the North Florida Alumni Group Association, because before they got started, I was doing all of this. And so they will pick them up at the airport. They host them with families here in Gainesville. They provide activities, and sometimes, bless you, sometimes far too many activities, because the kids do have to study. We took them out to Alachua Trail a couple weeks ago. They go in different places. We are associated with FSU as well, so we will do things together with the FSU Fulbright group up there. We have a fall luncheon. It's a welcome luncheon for alumni, any Fulbright alumni, maybe faculty who are on campus can also join the luncheon, and our new students and our current Fulbright students who will come and share information with new incoming students. As we said, they have to check in with me. I gave those to Matt. If you want to pass those out. Did you already?
Yeah.
Okay. The forms that Matt handed out, I sit down with every student and I go through this step by step. And you can see on here there are some reminders about if they're from Latin America or Caribbean. The one thing I had an afterthought when I got over here, I should have brought each of you a check-in folder, because in the folder we go through a form that is called It's Your Responsibility. I developed this form because we used to hear, not from necessarily Fulbrighters, but from the other incoming students, the phrase, "You did not tell me that. I never heard that." So we now have a form that talks about what does it require for you to maintain your status while you're in the United States. We talk about insurance requirements, and we talk about credentials. And the students have to read that, and they sign off on it, and I retain it. And then we send them an electronic copy once we get them in our system. Because we don't develop their documents, they're not automatically in our program system that we use for our other F1 students, so we manually input their data. And immediately they get an electronic copy. None of them come back to me and say, "Deborah, you didn't tell me this." Plus they get this form. We also inform them about their IDs. We inform them about their immunizations. So we walk them through the whole process. And we want you to know that we are there to assist you. This is why we try to take on some of this responsibility for our Fulbright students, and we try to do it for our other 6,700 other kids, but it's not always feasible for us. My staff consists of like 9 people, and only 6 of them are full-time advisors. So, but we do want to be a resource for you as well. We are not just there for the students, because this is maintaining the legal status while they're in this country. And that can fall back on a department as well. If you know a student is having a difficulty or they're struggling academically, we need to have a heads up about that, even our Fulbright students. They will automatically come see me because all of their arrival packets and their money, which is a critical and important element, are sent to me. I receive all of their Fulbright packets. And if there's any information that you want us to distribute to those students, you should also make sure that you have that to me. But they do check in, and they do get their initial packet through my office. UF does have some responsibilities to the students as well as to the placement agency. They have to it's critically important that departments keep in mind. Many times, until the last 2 years, we've been doing a lot more cost sharing up front. In the past, the Fulbright students were sponsored by Fulbright and they're commissioned back home, and they really needed funding towards the end of their program. And the kids have to go search for this. They have to get grants, they rely on departments and things like that. So it's something to keep in mind that when you see this coming through your admission process, that look at what Fulbright may be offering. Now, I don't handle this anymore. I think Matt probably gets these, but I used to do this process. And they would send me a form and ask me how much the department was going to offer. Well, back before we had the cost sharing between the departments at the front end, I could say on there the department wasn't offering anything. Now, that might make a difference as to where the student goes. I mean, another school might be offering them funding, and it's somebody you really want, then a department would offer it up front. Now I see more of that happening in the last 2 years. Also, it's important, the placing agency has to report to the federal government. I don't report to the federal government on these students like I do the other students. So we need to make sure that that is continuously being updated. They will contact the advisor. They will contact me, and they will contact Matt to ask if they're still maintaining satisfactory progress and if they're still going to receive. For instance, the students who get the LAC scholarship must go through my office. There's a 2-step process there, and the registrar who changes their residency to a temporary resident through the LAC process only uses our form. We need your form. For most students, for the Fulbright kids, we don't. Fulbright, as long as they are here on the Fulbright sponsorship, will automatically, the Latin American Caribbean kids will automatically receive in-state residency, a temporary in-state residency. But we have to notify their placement agency that this is still ongoing. For the student, we need to provide them with the regular support services that you might provide most any international student. You probably also find that, at least my experience in working with domestics and international, some of the domestic kids that come from out of state, you know, sometimes they're lost too. So we just ask that, you know, everybody provide the necessary resources that a student might need. And if you're seeing a problem, especially with one of the Fulbright students, please reach out to me. I am happy to work with you and with the student to try to get them the resources they need. And our North Florida group is very, very supportive. I mean, they do host our students usually as long as they're here. They're with the host family. We also have to provide these, so let me know what is going on. If there's a problem, this is what I'm referring to. And then once our students have completed their Fulbright funding process, many of them will transfer to UF, especially if UF is going to sponsor their funding resources. So we will go through a transfer of sponsorship process with the students. We must request, I have to see the funding. I need to see whether it's going to be personal funding, whether it will be departmental funding, or some sort of grant or LAC or whatever. Once they leave Fulbright, is responsibility. Any questions about any of your Fulbright? Any concerns? Yes.
Just to clarify, so if I have a student who's from South America, would I need to go to your site to get that LAC form to fill out and give to you, or can I just assume that that's automatic?
Okay. She's asking the question about the LAC form, whether or not they have to go to the site. For Fulbright students, you do not need to go to that template that we've created. You all are aware of the changes, or lack thereof, of changes with the Latin American Caribbean Scholarship. The BOG was making some major changes, and there was so much pushback from all of the universities and at the provost level that actually I think the changes benefited us, our departments, and the students. So for any other student, any other Latin American Caribbean student, you would use the template form we've created. But for the Fulbright students, you do not need to do that. Their terms of appointment is what notifies me that they are eligible for the LAC scholarship. And then I will have them fill out the LAC form. And you'll notice on here, those students from Latin American Caribbean, we remind them that they have to do it every semester. This is not a one-time thing. Even though their terms of appointment might say 2 years, if they have an academic problem or if there's an issue and something happens, we notify the registrar every semester through the process of filling out our form. So Fulbright doesn't need the template, but the kids will fill out the form with me every semester, and initial semester as well. Any other questions about your Fulbright students? Okay. I'm going to talk very briefly about the scholars. The one thing I do want to point out with scholars, they come into the U.S. under a different sponsoring agency. CIES is the one that handles incoming faculty and research scholars and students. One of the things, and I don't mean to muddy the waters or confuse the issue, on the slide we have advanced PhD student or faculty member. They can come under, and all faculty members and researchers will come under CIES. However, some of our students who are doing PhDs back home will be sponsored by IIE, and those students will come through me. I used to fight with IIE because we used to make those kids register for classes, and that was an extra expense. We've come to an agreement about this because I didn't want the students to end up having to pay that when it was unexpected for them, when they were just coming to do research with a professor. So you will see on some of their documents, they might be sponsored by IIE, they may be sponsored by CIES. So, but the students know. They will know to whom they need to reach out if there is a problem or a question. Most of these are coming for the short term. You will have them here for 3 months to a year. We currently have one of our Polish students, one of our Russian students is here only for the 9-month period. But she's sponsored under IIE, so she goes through me. They can come in any field of study, and so, you know, if your department would be interested in having one of these, it's not restricted. They will receive funding for the research, and they have to have a sponsor in your department. So a faculty member needs to be available with whom they can work. The other thing, and Matt has mentioned about the cultural exchange, it's extremely important. These are the different interacting stakeholders that we've just talked about. It's extremely important for departments to remember about the cultural exchange component. Our lecture series and the North Florida group do a lot of that, but sometimes we're not aware. If that scholar has not checked in with us, they don't get the same kind of notification. Their terms of appointment don't say, see Scott Davis. So unless you remind them to check in with us or whatever, we might not know about them. So they would not be aware of all of the resources that we provide. So the the responsibilities for the scholar, they will contact, well, they're supposed to contact EBS. I can tell you from experience they don't always do that, but we are working on that process with CIES to make sure that they direct them to a specific location. One of the things I would tell you, I had a college once that did not want to admit neither a Fulbright student nor a scholar because of what they saw as all the extraneous responsibilities, housing and airport pickup and different things. But I want you to know that there are resources out there like the North Florida group. They will do this with scholars. They will do this with the students. So if you ever hear one of your faculty members saying, I don't know, that's a lot of work, da 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 da, keep in mind that you have resources, and we are happy to take care of this for you. The other thing is we connect the new incoming students with the current Fulbrighters through a Facebook page that we have, and the students themselves, the current students, will also assist, and they will give them information that is beneficial and helpful, where to live, what to do, things like that. And the scholars can reach out as well as the students and use the resources that we've provided. Now, one thing that we can't provide for them is the office space. So for a scholar, your department would need to arrange some kind of space where they could sit and work while they're here. Please do invite them to participate in departmental functions and things like that. I will tell you, I had 2 years ago experience of a visiting scholar who came to a department, was never once invited to any activity in the department, wasn't invited out to dinner, even by the faculty who was sponsoring them. And so her reflection on this whole experience was not a very positive one. And that reflects back on UF. So, I mean, if it's a difficult situation for the department, reach out to us, because we're glad to help you. And for the students, you have made that effort, and they see that as well. They appreciate that coming from all of you. You do have to let us know if for some reason a scholar would depart the U.S. before the end date of their program. We are required to report that to CIES, who then must report it to the Department of State. There you go. These are our email contacts if you want to reach out to us. We really appreciate your time and coming and sitting through this. This is not the most exciting information, but if you have any questions at any time, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay. Coming. We appreciate it.